Ennis comes from the name Innis, and that means island. It was built originally by the Franciscans nearly 800 years ago. The Franciscans were friary monks. They were invited by the O'Brien family, and the O'Brien family were the kings of Thomond, and they invited them to come down and to build a monastery in Ennis, and it was built on a little island there. And eventually it began to grow, and Ennis developed out of that monastery. Ennis is built on the River Fergus. So the Fergus is a tributary of the River Shannon. That means that it's a little river coming out of the Shannon River, which is the largest river in Ireland. So Ennis is situated on the River Fergus. You may not recognise this picture here, but this is actually a picture from the olden days of the square in Ennis. Now, if you look at the square in Ennis now, it has the statue of Daniel O'Connell on it. So if you look at the building in the background there, that's actually the old courthouse. And that's where they used to bring all the criminals or people who had robbed things, and they used to go into that courthouse there, and then the judge would judge what he'd see fit for them. You can see all the people, it's very crowded there. It was originally used as the marketplace in Ennis, but because Ennis has very, very, very narrow streets, they found that it was very difficult for all of the carriages to come into Ennis. So they had to decide to put the market in a different place. So you know where the market is now. That's where they moved the market to. Now, if you look at the picture of the old courthouse there, there's still part of that wall. If you look up on O'Connell Street, you'll still see a little bit of that wall, and it still exists today. The next picture we're looking at here is of the market. Now, this is the market as it is today, but back way in the olden days, they used to have markets there very regularly where they'd bring in all of their cattle, and there'd be carts and everything else there. And sometimes very rough gangs used to come there, and they'd have sticks and they'd fight each other. So it was quite a dangerous place to be at times. The new car park that's in the market now, under that car park, there's a very, very old graveyard under the car park there. I think there might be a little plaque there if you look around that just says that there are people buried under the car park that's there now. Our next picture is of Parnell Street. Now, Parnell Street, it hasn't changed that much from the picture that you can see there. If you go down that road, the cinema is down there, so you might recognise it from the street the cinema is on. Now, back in the olden days, it was quite a dirty place, because remember, they had no cleaning facilities or anything there. So a lot of the people, what they used to do, they'd have a little pot under their bed, and it was called the piss pot. And you can imagine what they did in that piss pot. And when they were finished with the piss pot, they had to chuck it out the window. So if some poor person was walking by as they were emptying their piss pot, it wasn't very nice for them. Now, also on the streets at those times, it was so dirty and filthy that you'd actually find wild pigs running around. Down many of the lanes, you can see a lane there on the right-hand side. Families used to live down those lanes. And actually, I think Mr. Brennan, I can't remember his first name, he's just after writing a book about families that live down all the lanes in Ennis. This picture here is of a house that's down Parnell Street, the same street we were looking at there. It's called McPartlin's, and it's actually quite an interesting house because it's very historical. It has a chimney there from the Jacobean period. So that's the 17th century. It's one of the oldest chimneys in Ireland, and actually that house there is one of the oldest house that's made with a wooden frame. You can see the shape of the chimney there. It looks quite old, doesn't it? They've done quite a bit of work on it in restoring it, because it's a very important historical building in Ennis. You might recognise this building here. This is the old Abbey in Ennis. They've done quite a bit of work on it now, so it might look a little bit different. They put a roof on it. This Abbey here is one of the oldest buildings in Ennis. It's said that there's a mad monk who's a ghost, and he lives up in the tower there. Now, I don't really believe it, but the story is that the mad monk refused to leave the Abbey when all the monks moved out, and that he can still be seen from the tower up there at the top. Our next picture now you will recognise as being the Daniel O'Connell monument up in the square. Now remember I said that the courthouse used to be up there when they used to have the markets up there. So anybody who was up in court for any kind of crime was brought up here to the square for trial. And there was one famous trial. It was the trial of Biddy Early. And Biddy Early was known as a witch in Clare. She was supposed to have magic powers, and she had a little blue bottle, and she was able to cure people. So lots of people went to get cures from Biddy Early. Now, when she was brought up for trial, there were a lot of witnesses that were brought forth, but they were all too scared of poor Biddy Early. They were afraid that she'd put a curse on them. So none of them would speak up against her. So Biddy Early was never charged, and she died. She actually lasted to an old age, and she died. And it said that she gave the blue bottle with all her magic in it to the local priest. And the priest is said to have thrown it into the river because he didn't want it to get into the wrong hands. Now people have come from all around and tried to look for Biddy Early's bottle. So it's a very interesting story, a very interesting witch who comes from Clare. I know we learned about the witch of Kilkenny before, so it's lovely that we have one in Ennis. I don't really believe she was a witch. I think that she might have been able to do little cures for people. But in the olden days, if anybody was a little bit different, people weren't that nice to them. This next picture here is a picture of a lovely looking woman. Her name is Mararua, and Mararua lived in a castle that's outside Currafin. It's called Lemonack Castle. Now, Mara was not very nice to her husbands. She had 3 husbands, and there's a story that says that she threw them all from the roof of her castle. Now, I don't really believe that, but that's the way the story goes. Here's another place you might recognise. This is the Old Ground Hotel. Now, the reason that I showed you Mararua before is there was a fireplace in Lemonack Castle. And when the castle went into ruin, the fireplace was moved to a room in the Old Ground Hotel, and it's called the Mararua Room. And again, everybody loves the story. They say that Mararua can be seen there at times inside in the Mararua Room. The next picture here is a picture of the side of the Old Ground. I don't know whether any of you know the Town Hall restaurant. So that Town Hall restaurant, it used to actually be a jail. And O'Connell Street was known as Jail Street. And back during the famine times, when people were very, very hungry, some people didn't want to go to the workhouse. So they actually got themselves put into jail because they thought that they would be fed in there. Now, in this jail here as well, sometimes back in the olden days, people would put baskets out the windows, hoping that passers-by would give them a little bit of food. At the very end of the street as well, there used to be a kind of overhead bridge or arch that used to attach the 2 sides, and this was like it was like the doors into Ennis town. The last picture I have here is of the old industrial school. Now, this building isn't in Ennis anymore, but it was situated down at the back of Dunn's, probably where Dunn's multi-storey car park is now. And any orphans or little kids whose parents couldn't take care of them could be sent to this school here. There's a story that goes, I think the little girl's name was Eliza, and she really didn't like being in the school. And one time she jumped from a 2nd-storey window and ran away, but she was brought back to the school afterwards. As far as I know, Eliza, I think, later emigrated to America. She actually wasn't an orphan, but her parents couldn't take care of her, and they moved to America, and I think she later on went over and joined with them. So that industrial school isn't there any longer, but it's an old building that used to exist in Ennis.